Hello, everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. We're cracking right on along here with the player's guide, taking a look at the monk character class, specifically the more or less optimized damage dealing wrecking ball build that we've been putting together and playing around with so far. And today we are going to finally be taking a look at what the damage looks like when we follow this guide generally. I'm not throwing in all the items we've discussed here because, like I said before, that particular variable just depends on what exactly is given to your character or what you're able to purchase or find. Or if there's even magic and the like available in the setting. If there's no magic, well, then a lot of the magic items can be disregarded entirely. But for the most part, all this other damage stuff, though, and some of the defensive items, we can still take a look at and give ourselves a pretty solid idea of what everything looks like. Let's get started, shall we? Now, the first step we look at is at level 1. Now, the monk, like I said before, starting off, defense isn't all that great. It's not terrible, but you can see here we're at an armor class of 15, so any roll total of 15 or better is going to connect and hit the monk, and the monk does not have a ton of hit points to spare starting off. And this will be a continuing theme overall. But the nice thing is that those saves, fortitude, reflex, and will, are all really good. There aren't really any other classes that are going to have all 3 saves at this solid of a number each. So really, really nice to have there. And bear in mind that fortitude resists stuff like poisons and diseases. Reflex is what gets you out of the way of all those pesky fireballs that those casters like to throw around, and will save is what protects your mind against all those different charm and illusion spells. But we want to take a look at the damage here, and if you take a look, you see for Flurry of Blows, which in melee, you're getting 2 attacks at a +3 bonus to hit each, dealing 1d6 plus 4 points of damage, with critical hits on a roll of 20, and if you confirm your critical hit again afterwards. Minimum damage you're doing is going to be 10, with a max of 20 and an average of 15. And this is if both attacks hit. If one of the attacks misses, then of course, obviously cut these numbers in half. And if you can't quite get into melee range, you still have a ranged option using your shuriken. Now, your attack is significantly lower at a +1/+1, and you're doing 1d2 plus 4 points of damage. But the minimum you're going to be doing here is 8 points of damage. Max is going to be 10, and your average you're looking at about 11. I'm sorry, your max is going to be about 12, and your average is right around the 10, 11-ish sort of range there. And just for comparison, if you just make a single unarmed attack, you do get a +4 total to hit. You're still doing the same amount of damage, but you'll see that your averages are just already cut in half for 5, 10, and 7 points of damage. It's just really not all that great starting off, and this is why you need to flurry as much as possible, because if you're just running around taking move actions and then throwing out a single punch or kick or headbutt or however you describe it, you are really not going to be living up to your potential, and you're not going to be surviving very long out there on the front line. But your combat maneuver bonus starting off is going to be a +4. You get nothing from your attack bonus at this level because not all of your monk abilities have kicked in, and everything is just coming off of your strength bonus. Now, this is something I wanted to talk about in comparison and juxtaposition with the fighter build, and that'll be coming up in the next image here. But combat maneuvers are going to be things like your trip attacks, your disarming, sundering, bull rushing, overrun, or even grapple. All of these things will fall under your combat maneuver bonus, and this is what you add to your roll. It works basically like a melee attack for all intents and purposes. But this is your go-to number for when you make any of these specialized combat maneuvers. And if you have the relevant feats associated with those different maneuvers, this also provides you with a +2 bonus on top of all of this here, as well as making you essentially proficient with the maneuvers, so you're not provoking attacks of opportunity every single time you try any of these maneuvers. And right along with that, you have your combat maneuver defense. This is what your opponents are trying to beat when they make these combat maneuver checks. This is what you're trying to beat when you make these maneuvers yourself. And in this case, for the monk is actually kind of starting to come together really nicely here with this. They're really great at defending against all these different specialized attack maneuvers. Starting with a score of 19, everybody gets a base of 10. Nothing from the attack bonus, but we're adding in strength, dexterity, and we're adding in that all-important wisdom score on top of everything else here. So the monk does really nicely. And in this particular case, since we're a dwarf, we get a +4 racial modifier to trip and bull rushing attacks. So the dwarf is really hard to move, knock over, and put down onto the ground, which is incredibly nice to have here. Not many of these attacks are going to really succeed, especially at this level. Let's compare this to our optimized fighter build. Now, the fighter has better hit points and better defense, and also has a better fortitude score, but not by much. But you can see that they really lag behind on the reflex and will saves. They're really vulnerable to the attacks that affect these particular scores. So that's an area where the monk has an advantage, even though starting at level 1, the fighter is probably the more optimal choice for a combat role. Because if you take a look, their melee attack using that greatsword, it's a +5 to attack, so they have better odds of hitting. They're doing 2d6 +6 points of damage just with a regular standard attack. So they're going to be outpacing the damage for a single attack by quite a bit with better odds to hit. And when they power attack, everything just gets even better, because now they're still doing better than what the monk does, or just as good if the monk is doing their own single attack. But those damage averages jump up quite a bit, and bear in mind, this particular build makes pretty active use of the cleave feat. So even though the fighter only has one attack, if they're in range of multiple opponents, and those opponents are adjacent to each other, one successful attack means they get to make another free attack against that second target. Not guaranteed to hit, but you know what? At this level, this is still a pretty solid attack bonus to have going here. So chances are the fighter is going to hit more often than not and just bump their damage potential through the roof. Like I said, level 1, fighters tend to be a fairly optimal choice in comparison to a lot of the other classes. Their combat maneuver bonus is also better because they start off with an attack bonus, so they're not massively better, but it's an area where they are still performing better than what the monk does starting out. Their defense is not near as good though, just because they're not getting that wisdom bonus on top of their combat maneuver defense. So this is another spot where they can be a bit more vulnerable than say the monk is. But going on from there, we're going to jump on up to level 10 with both of these character classes. And you can see where this really starts to shift in the monk's favor. The hit points still fairly low at about 67, but initiative has gone up to about a +6 total with the improved initiative feat. Their fortitude, reflex, and will saves are at 9, 9, and 10 respectively. Armor class is at 21 because the armor class bonus monk ability has kicked in, and I threw in a bracers of AC +4 in there on top of it all just to kind of help round things out. At level 10, that's not an unreasonable item to see available for most character classes. But Coming down to flurry of blows with melee here, the monk gets a whopping 4 attacks at a really solid attack bonus with plus 13 for the first 2 attacks and then plus 8s for the second round of attacks there. And they're dealing 1d10 plus 5 points of damage unarmed. Now, if you'll remember the Sansatsuken, the 3-section staff, this also does 1d10, so this substitutes really easily here. And at level 10, your monk is probably going to be armed more often than not when making attacks. The reason for this is at level 10, you're really starting to see a lot of enemies and opponents with some sort of damage reduction available. So if you take a look here, the minimum damage that a monk will do, assuming all of the attacks hit, is 24 points of damage. Max is going to be 60. The average is going to float around 42-ish or so. But these are all separate attacks, and if you're hitting somebody a target barehanded that has, say, even just 5 points of damage reduction, that's 5 points off of every attack. So that's 20 points of damage that's subtracted out of your total here. So if you did the bare minimum, you're only breaking about 4 points of damage there. You're barely tickling your target at level 10. Even if you're doing your maximum, you'll have overcome the damage reduction a bit, but it's only 40 points of damage. That's going to catch your target's attention, certainly, but the odds of that happening are so insignificant. And then your average is 42. Again, not bad. You'll still be doing 22 points of damage afterwards, but at level 10, a single target has a pretty good chance of being able to eat that kind of damage, and that's assuming you're dealing with just one target. If you're dealing with a couple of enemies that have 5 points of damage reduction and you're splitting your attacks between them, you're shooting yourself in the foot, but also this is really going to take a long time. And this is where having arms that are enchanted or made of the specific materials required for overcoming damage reduction is going to be hugely important for you. It's going to be massively helpful. Now, if you're power attacking, these numbers do boost a little bit. You're dropping your attack bonus a bit by 1 point for each attack, but the damage is still going up by a significant amount, by 8 points of damage overall for this. So that will help, but even still, you're probably going to want to be armed regardless, because the numbers break down to the exact same either way. So if you're dealing with opponents with damage reduction, break out the weapons. You should have quick draw by this point, so you can switch back and forth between fists or weapons easy enough. And if you're using weapons in your hands but you want to do unarmed damage, just kick and knee them or elbow them. You don't necessarily have to use the weapons or put the weapons back in order to deal your unarmed damage. Although, again, it breaks down to the exact same thing at this level using the 3-section staff. Now, if you're having to use shuriken, again, the numbers aren't as good as if you're in melee, but it still gives you that flexible tactical option if you can't get into that melee range. The damage still isn't great, but it's still better than just being stuck with doing no damage overall. But now we come down to our combat maneuver bonus, and at this point, the monk training ability is kicked in by level 3, so now we get to use our class level instead of our base attack bonus for the combat maneuvers. So we're at a nice solid 15 here. Our strength has gone up to +5, because if you're leveling this character up and you're getting those ability points in, you're pumping all of those into strength. Because remember, we want to hit more often and we want to do more damage with this build. Those are the two biggest concerns right there. So we also have the greater grapple combat maneuver as an option, or greater overrun. Which one you go with depends entirely on what you want to do, or what kind of picture and fighting style you have in mind for this monk, but these will come in at +17s for you. And the combat maneuver defense is at a beautiful 31, or 34 in case anybody's trying to trip or bull rush this particular Dwarven monk. Those are going to be really hard numbers to beat right there for all these different combat maneuvers. It's not impossible, but it's still going to be fairly difficult. It's going to be very inconsistent for for any opponents to do this. And bear in mind, this is with a minimal number of magic items applied to these stats here. You could very easily have Rings of Armor class, Boots of Speed, all different sorts of items available here to boost the combat potential even further. And also, I'm not including in with this here the ability to spend your key points in order to get yourself an extra attack, or setting things up like Stunning Fist and Medusa's Wrath, which will again boost these numbers even further. I mean, you take a look at the maximum damage if you're power attacking with your flurry of blows. You're looking at 68 points of damage, and you're probably averaging closer to about 50-ish overall. That's absolutely incredible, and really what you want to see happening here. But we compare that with our level 10 fighter. Again, the fighter is going to have the higher hit point totals and the higher armor class. For the fighter here, threw in Magic Full Plate and a Ring of Protection +1. Which really boosts that. Fortitude saves, absolutely amazing. +11. Reflex is not great, and will is also just terrible. Again, these are really strong vulnerabilities, and by level 10, the fighter is definitely not the most optimal character class anymore as far as just pure game mechanics goes. By level 6, the other character classes are all for sure just entirely outclassing the fighter overall. But let's still compare these damages. If he's meleeing with their +1 greatsword of speed, like we talked about before, he's got really beautiful chances to hit here with +18s for the first two attacks, and then a +13, looking at 2d6 +10 for the damage total there, with still a higher crit range than what the monk has. Minimum damage is going to be 36, max is 66, with an average of about 51. So the monk is only about 1 point behind-ish in the overall average damage output here. And again, that's without counting in all these other extra options that the monk has available to them. Really, the monk could easily be bumping up past the fighter overall. Until the fighter power attacks, which actually, even if the fighter power attacks and they're hitting, the monk still has options to keep pace with them, but the fighter is also using cleave and setting themselves up to be able to use cleave as often as possible. So these numbers can double quite easily, considering that they're making 3 attacks, power attacking, and doing cleave. They're going to be pumping out quite a bit of damage. But again, the monk still has their own options and has a wider degree of maneuverability, is moving farther and faster than what the fighter can, and it keeps stacking up is the point. The combat maneuver bonus is at a +15 as well. They have really solid options here. And the combat maneuver defense is sitting at 26, which, again, not bad, but the monk is still doing quite a bit better here with 5 points total difference overall. So the fighter is definitely, while they are still keeping pace with damage, and they have a better armor class and better hit point totals overall, there's still a lot of vulnerabilities here and opportunities where they're either taking damage or being taken out of the fight entirely, that the monk is not quite so afflicted by, specifically reflex saves and will saves. This is where the monk is going to be really starting to outshine the fighter overall. So yeah, that's the breakdown overall right there with the comparison between the two classes. So by focusing on pumping up our monk's damage dealing abilities, we really start to see that the monk, once they're focused and there's a tighter control over what exactly we're trying to do, the monk can really start to shine and be effective as a character overall. There are still other options out there from a purely mechanical standpoint that you can consider as more effective. or just all around a better character class overall. But the monk is by no means a terrible class, really, in my mind. Unless you're playing with something totally broken that's homebrew, there really aren't a lot of totally worthless character classes out there for me, just because, again, for me, story is number one. But taking a look at this mechanical breakdown here, I hope this has helped you to realize how you can make the monk character class much more effective. I should also mention here, I was fully intending to do a comparison with the interesting fighter build, but in looking back over my notes and everything I'd put together, and in comparison to what was in the video, I made a couple of mistakes. There were some feats that needed to be listed that I had completely spaced on in my excitement to get the video put together, because I was having so much fun with this specific interesting fighter build. So I need to make a couple of corrections, and next video we will compare the damage totals between them. But that said, I hope you've enjoyed the content here so far. I hope you have been enjoying your time down here at the Gamers Den, but sadly, this is where we're going to be ending it for today. If you enjoyed the video, throw down a like there. And if you've been enjoying the content overall down here at the Gamers Den, why not consider subscribing and becoming a full-time member here? We always love having more people down here to join us. But with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. You folks have yourselves a good night.